my name is Jared Goldman.
And Jared, can you tell us a little bit about how you started your career and kind of, how you got to where you're at now?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the wonderful things about the entertainment industry is there's no independent side, there's no ladder to climb, right? I guess if you go work at a company, you can work up a ladder. My trajectory has been sort of unusual, but I think it's as unusual as anybody else's trajectory because everybody just has to forge their own path. I really wanted to go into the music industry, but when I was in college, Napster was happening, and I felt like, well, if I am downloading music from Napster, I am essentially just stealing from my future self. So that means this is going to get way worse before it gets any better. Boy, I hope there's some type of statute that I just didn't incriminate myself. That now, like the music industry is going to.
I think we got 7 years, so I think you're good on it. Napster hasn't been around for 7.
um, so I was fortunate enough. I was able to get an internship at MARAMAX Films in its heyday in New York. I was in publicity and then in the acquisitions department. The acquisitions department is the department that goes both looking at films that are in film festivals that are looking for distribution and need a home, as well as looking at material that is unproduced that Miramax would then make in-house. And that opportunity, when I graduated, turned into a job. And then that job then got downsized, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months after I was there, Disney downsized. And I was able to very fortunately pivot and get a job at a robust production and financing entity called Green Street Films, where they made films like the Todd Field movie In the Bedroom, which was nominated for a bunch of Oscars, and the Brittany Murphy film Uptown Girls, and the Robert Altman movie A Prairie Home Companion. So it was a really fertile and creative and just like exciting place to be. And what was really formative for me was that while I was there, the company was run by two people. One is a guy named John Panotti, who came up as an assistant director working for Sidney Lumet, and for Fisher Stevens, who's now on Succession, and he's got a big documentary company, and he's a very successful actor, producer, director. But John and the head of production there, having come up working for Sidney Lumet, were doing all of the breakdowns of the projects, which means that they are, you take a script and then you're looking at scene by scene, like how would we film this? Where would we film this? How would we couple all of these different locations together? And then from there, you budget the film to figure out how much would it actually then cost to do this. So we were doing all of that work in-house, and I recognized like, oh, this is a pretty critical part of the process to understand, like, okay, you do a breakdown of a script and you learn to make this as scripted costs, I don't know, pick a number, $15 million. However, the marketplace, with this type of story, with these types of actors, will only allow for probably $10 million worth of financing. So what do, right? So then it becomes the process of looking at the story and seeing, is there a way to do it for less without undermining the integrity of the thing? And that, learning how to do that became really like a beacon for me. I love that part of the process because it is really where the creative and commerce sort of like marry into each other. So when I left Green Street, I had that skill set of understanding how to do that. And I produced a documentary in 2007 called Manda Bala, Send a Bullet, about the cyclical nature of corruption and kidnapping in Brazil. And it's about a frog farm that's at the tip of a $2 billion corruption scandal. That got into Sundance and won the grand jury prize. And that opened like a whole bunch of doors for me. Actually, anecdotally, when that movie won, David Lee Roth of Van Halen had reached out because he is a huge fan of like all things Brazil and Brazilian culture and Brazilian music and cinema. And he asked to see the film, and then he invited the director and me to go see Van Halen as his guest at Madison Square Garden. And then I have a Google alert for Manda Bala, and then 2 weeks ago or so, I got the first Google alert on the movie in years, and it's because David Lee Roth released a song called Manda Bala, which I'm just gonna, for my own merriment, assume is his tribute to the documentary I made. I have no idea whether that's true or not, but it feels good to think that like maybe I somehow influenced David Lee Roth. But anyway, then that opened a bunch of doors, and it allowed me to sort of nimbly over the last 15 years or so just navigate being um, hired both as like a creative producer where I'm developing projects and helping get them set up. What that means is, whether it's my finding a story and then finding a writer and then finding a director and actors and then setting it up with financing, or writers and directors coming to me with a script or their ideas and then doing the same thing. Or what often also happens is I will get called from friends and colleagues who will say, all right, Jared, we've got this project. Here's all the people involved. We've got a budget of, X and the financing of, X minus insert percentage amount. Can we pay you to consult to work with us to figure out how to get this thing into production? I'm very fortunate that I can sort of think with both, in the sort of practical production sense as well as think, creative, story problem solving sense.
No, it makes sense. And how? Let's go back a little bit. How did you get into MARAMAX? I feel like just getting your foot into the doorstep of a big studio is a very hard process. How do you get there and then move up from that to starting to? You said you started in PR, then moved up to like acquisitions. How does that come together?
Yeah, so the internship came about through a filmmaker named Brian Koppelman. Brian subsequently has created the TV show Billions. It's a huge show, which I'm sure, given where this airs, or will have many followers. But so I, through like family connections, had met Brian, and he saw my interest in storytelling and filmmaking, and we're both just big music geeks, so we really connected on that. And then he was making Rounders at Miramax, which was the poker movie with Ed Norton and Matt Damon, and I was looking for something to do for the summer, and so I asked him, "Is there anybody you can put me in touch with at Miramax who like you think might need an intern?" And so like he connected me with someone there, and that led to that initial internship, and then I just worked my ass off. It's so much of the industry is also very apprentice based, so like who you end up working for can really end up opening lots of opportunities if that person themselves is very well respected or a hard worker, or so the publicity thing. When I was an intern, right, I was interning publicity. That was for 2 months. Then the following summer, I came back interning in acquisitions. I was just able to move over. And then when I graduated and got a job, that was in also sort of in the acquisitions business affairs area. But all of that, what's so interesting is like it's not the glamorous side of the industry, but it is like the anchor of the industry of the filmmaking process. Like you have to understand the arc of you make a project. What do you do with it, right? Like I've seen projects come to a halt because people weren't thorough in the acquisitions process, where like you got to make sure your contracts are signed, right? It's like all of that sort of stuff. That's it's not fun, but it is so critical. And that's sort of, well, as someone who was starting my career, all of that stuff got dumped on me, right? Make sure this person signed it, call them, make sure, like, we can't release the movie until they sign their thing. Photocopies, I got very, very good at making photocopies and FedExing things to Los Angeles. But it makes you really, like, it really conditions you to be incredibly detail oriented.
So Disney comes in, kind of wipes a lot of people out of there, and you move over to a new production company. Is there any point of that time that you kind of felt like giving up, or any time like you were just like, this is not going to work out for me?
What's funny is no. I mean, what's funny is like I just had this sort of blissful naivete where I was just like, I believe maybe I was very fortunate to have good parents who told me I can do anything, but I was like, I believe I can do this. Other people have done this. I can do this, and so I never felt like it wasn't going to work. I just didn't know how it was going to work, right? Like the challenge again with the industry is because there's no ladder, right? It's hard to look at somebody who's 30 years older than you and be like, I want to do what they're doing. It's like, sure, but like how they got there is not how you will get there. And especially because the industry has changed so much, right? Like just think about, I wasn't around, but but like when VHS came in, right? It probably caused everyone to go, the industry's falling apart, right? And then cable had the same thing, and then DVDs had the same thing, and now streaming's had the same thing, right? It's like, so you have to be, so someone who's 30 years older than you came up in an industry that's really very different than what you would experience. So what I have found to be meaningful for me in trying to understand, okay, well, then where do I go, right? At least early on, what I would try to do is like, I got really good advice from a guy named Cary Granite. Cary was the head of Dimension, which was Miramax's genre label, like they did the Scream movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he had said to me, try to just look 3 years ahead. Don't look like, that's great. You want to be, you want to run a company or you want to do whatever. He said, there's no ladder. So if you just look 3 years ahead, who's someone who's 2 or 3 years older than you, who is doing something that seems like you'd want to be doing that in 2 or 3 years? And that at least is a trajectory that you can clearly see because they're only 2 or 3 years older than you. And so I was like trying to look at that a little bit, but like, I don't know. I just had this belief. I was like, I really love the storytelling process, and I'm an extrovert, so I love talking to people. And I was like, and that's so much. That's what the industry is, right? So I was like, okay, I'll just figure it out, right? And like when I got laid off from Miramax, I was just like, I don't know, I'll just find a job. It was really hard to find that first job because I graduated in 2001. And then when September 11th happened, there were no jobs. So it took me 9 months, I think, to get my first job out of college. And then I was like, all right, well, I got that one. I guess I'll just get another one. And if I have to sleep on couches of friends in the city or I have to go stay with family, as long as they welcome me to do that, then I'll just do that. So
And that's so once you go into like you said you had the documentary. I think that was a little bit earlier in your career, right?
yeah, that was in 2007.
So that goes to Sundance, wins. Does that help your career, or you were already kind of on that level? Does it really? Because we did talk to a producer that he went to Sundance with the movie called Believe with Ryan Gosling, and it kind of just really shot his career up. It was like that was the one stepping stone that really brought him to the next level. Did you feel that in that aspect,
I
or?
I did just because it gave me a little bit of credibility, and I think it helped me distinguish myself that much more from other people my age or other first-time filmmakers, right? There's plenty of people who make movies, but then those movies never do anything. So to have the first movie I made to win the festival, I like to think that it maybe distinguished me for some people. I mean, again, it's a documentary about corruption and kidnapping in Brazil. So that's a third world country, right? So it's not like, a an English language fiction feature with like an actor who then broke out. It's still a documentary. Um, but it's something I'm incredibly proud of. It was incredibly dangerous to make it, and a lot of fun. I made it with my closest friend, and it's become something now that has attained a little bit of cult status. Like the Museum of the Moving Image listed it as one of the top 20 documentaries of the century so far. So I mean, we're almost a quarter into the century, so I'll take that. So yeah, I mean, I think it helped in just shifting perspective or helping create perspective of like who I am as a person in the industry.
And as a producer that kind of uses both, the business side and the creative side on set, was there anything that kind of just on set you're always kind of problem solving. So was there anything that really happened that was on any movie that was like really bad that you were like, I don't know how to get out of the situation, kind of an oh shit moment?
No, I mean, because there's always problems, right? So it's just about approaching them with a clear head and trying to understand how you can help solve the problem, right? You can analyze how the problem happened afterwards, but so much of it's just about creating a safe environment, safe working environment. Mondavala was unique because it was in Brazil, and I was a first-time producer. It was a first-time director, right? Where like I was still it took 5 or 6 years to maybe 7 years to make that documentary. So over the course 6 years maybe. So over the course of making that, I was working at Miramax and working at Green Street, and fortunately just had very, very supportive bosses who believed in me. But it was the director, Jason Cohn, who was down in Brazil. And so he was calling me. I was trying to, and updating me on how the filming was going. I was trying to gather resources to continue the shoot while I was working my day job, at MARAMAX and Green Street. And, when you're in a third world country and you're trying to find kidnappers, let's say, right, you end up encountering a lot of unsavory people, and you end up in challenging situations. So
Do
it
we go
was
to
very, very
Craigslist
dangerous.
for
What?
kidnappers? Like how do we find kidnappers? Just out of curiosity.
So the movie is about the cyclical nature of corruption and kidnapping in Brazil, and about this frog farm in the northernmost part of Brazil. It's so fun to talk about. I haven't talked about this movie in such a long time. About a frog farm that's in the northernmost part of Brazil, in an area called Sundance, and we interview a frog farmer. The movie opens with this big crane shot on a frog farm, which I don't know if you've ever seen what a frog farm looks like, but it is tens of thousands of frogs on like acres and acres of frog farm. And what we get into with that first interview is that there is a politician in Sudan who had allocated money, government funds, to his wife to start another frog farm. And we start to ask our frog farmer, has he worked with that frog farm, the politician's frog farm? And what we get into is like that frog farm, the politician's frog farm doesn't really exist, right? It exists on paper. It's just a way for the politician to have sort of given his wife millions of dollars. It's just corruption, right? It's just classic sort of corruption. But what happens in a third world country like that is like when you are stealing money on that level, and that instead of going to create jobs and create industry and help warm up really rural economies, when you're stealing that money and then denying people the opportunity to work, you're just flat out sort of murdering them, right? Because then they can't eat, and so then we get into another storyline with a kidnapper who had left northern Brazil because it was impoverished and he couldn't make a living. He moved to Sao Paulo, where he is living in a favela, and he becomes this sort of Robin Hood character where he is, kidnapping people and then taking the ransom to help feed people in the community. Finding him was very challenging. So after Jason had come back with a bunch of footage, we did not have the kidnapper, but we realized to make the story complete, Jason would have to go back to Brazil, and we'd have to find someone to fill in this aspect of the story. So it was one of the most challenging and singular moments of my career to turn to my best friend and say, the movie looks great, the stories are coming together, but you really have to go back to Brazil, and it'd be great if you could find someone who was, kidnapped or murdered someone for money, right? And it's like, you can't just go stand on a street corner and try to find these people. So the investigation into figuring out how to find that person was its own adventure. And what ended up happening is we had tried to go through the Brazilian prison system, but then the prison system became suspicious that we were trying to do some type of expose on, on the underbelly of the Brazilian prison system. And by serendipity, Jason got a toothache and had been using this one taxi service for all the many months he had been in Brazil. He gets into this taxi and the driver says, Jason, how's the movie going? And Jason says, I'm really stuck. I need to find someone who has come to the city to try to make ends meet, and someone who works illicitly. And the taxi driver said, look, there's a guy who, to make a little money on the side, he will give me packages. I don't ask what's in the packages. I deliver the packages where he wants me to, and he gives me some money. So that guy might be a way in. And so then Jason was introduced to that guy, who then connected him to this world. And then Jason gets a phone call from the person we ended up interviewing, who said, I hear you're looking for someone who makes a living kidnapping. And so we interviewed this guy who's this Robin Hood character. It was a pretty wild experience.
No, absolutely. And from there, is there anything new you're working on now that you have coming out?
Yeah. Well, I had a movie come out Memorial Day weekend, very different than Mandubala. A movie come out Memorial Day weekend called About My Father, with a comedian named Sebastian Maniscalco, and a up and coming actor named Robert De Niro.
Yes,
Um,
brand
uh,
new.
um, uh, and then I've got a movie that'll likely come out in 2024 called The Parenting, which was made for New Line Cinema. It's about a gay couple that, in looking to get engaged, rent a weekend house um, to invite their parents to come and meet and celebrate. But little does anyone know that not only is the house possessed by a demon, but it's possessed by a homophobic demon. So one set of parents is played by Brian Cox from Succession and Edie Falco from Nurse Jackie and The Sopranos. The other set of parents is played by Lisa Kudrow, and Parker Posey and Dean Norris plays her husband. Dean Norris from Breaking Bad. Parker Posey is the woman who summons the demon. The gay couple is a guy named Brandon Flynn from 13 Reasons Why, and a stand-up from LA named Nick Dodani. So that'll come out. It's written by a guy named Ken Sublette, who's the head writer of SNL, and directed by Craig Johnson. Craig and I, this is the fourth or fifth movie I've made with Craig. The first movie we made together was a movie that came out 10 years ago called The Skeleton Twins with Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader, which is like the little indie movie that could. So I'm always working. What's been fun is what streaming has really accelerated over the last couple of years is that, as a producer coming up, it was, if you're in New York, you're sort of like a New York movie producer. TV was a separate industry, and now, what's happened is over the last couple of years, there's this fluidity in just the sort of storytelling process where I can now go pitch something as a movie, as a TV show. I produced the second season of the Netflix show Russian Doll, and I produced the second season of the Netflix Marvel series of The Punisher. So now I've been doing more TV, and now I want to get into animation. I think there's a huge storytelling opportunity in animation. Obviously, I've been doing documentaries. That director who I made Vondavala with Jason Cohn and I had a documentary come out a year ago on Showtime, which is now Paramount Plus, called Nothing Lasts Forever, which is about the diamond industry and the mixing of synthetic diamonds with natural diamonds, which is causing a little bit of chaos in the diamond industry. And the movie feels like we filmed it to feel like almost like an Indiana Jones thriller. So for any Showtime or Paramount Plus subscribers out there, go see Nothing Lasts Forever. But it's been great. It's just so busy. It's really busy.
Okay, and my last question is kind of, do you have any advice for like new filmmakers coming up and starting out?
Yeah, sure. The industry, again, like there's no ladder. So the industry is really about networking and about, what I'm looking for with people who I'm meeting. If it's people who are looking to be on the, production side and the producing side, or, work for a company, it's really about like listening. I find that so many people are get distracted so easily by their phone buzzing or whatnot. Listen to like what you are being asked for, and then the big thing is anticipation, right? It's if you can see what the people around you need and you can anticipate that, that will help get you very far very quickly, as well as just being a very clear communicator. I think being a clear communicator is paramount to anything. As far as on the filmmaking side, just do it, right? I think like go make a good short. But just the story is what's the most important thing, right? If think about like who is the audience for your story, how would you want to get it to them? Why does the world want to see this story? Like I at the moment have sort of shifted away from more bleak stories and find like I'm all for things that are melancholy and dark, but there has to be aspects that are both playful and hopeful. And I've always loved that balance of, I don't know, playfulness and poignancy. I was very fortunate early in my career to make two movies with Rob Reiner. One was called The Magic of Belle Isle with Morgan Freeman, and the other one was called And So It Goes with Michael Douglas and Diane Keaton. And that initial run of Rob's, I came to realize was so inspirational to me. He directed This Is Spinal Tap, The Sure Thing, Stand By Me, Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, and The American President. I mean, that's sort of a wildly successful run of stories in sort of like a Billy Wilder kind of way. And those two movies I made with Rob was like the greatest film school one could ever ever ask to attend. But what I learned is like a lot of those movies, if you look at them, even though they hop genres, they always have this ratio of humor to heart. I mean, it's essentially just make them laugh, make them cry, right? If you can make your audience laugh and make them cry, I mean, that's the old adage. It's like then you have them really immersed. But Rob's movies also always had this sort of underlying current of yearning and melancholy that I love, and they're just funny and heartfelt. So he was very clear of like these are the stories I want to tell. And he understood that you can make things that are commercial and artful. That don't have to be based on some pre-existing IP. And the number of conversations I have where I'm told, oh, what's the pre-existing IP? It's like, well, everything was an original story at one point, right? Star Wars was an original idea. So if you just, for filmmakers, it's like, find a story that is good. You will know it's good because it's the same way when you tell your friends a story at a restaurant and they lean in, you've got their attention. Your story that you want to film should be the same sort of ideology. So make sure you find a story that you're certain is compelling, and that you understand who the audience for this can be, and just follow that. Follow that. It'll Good things find their audience. I like to believe anyway.